One of the more often talked about discussions that people have inside football circles is should you rest your starters week 17 if you already have your playoff seeding locked up? And I find that a very interesting discussion, especially because if you look at the numbers, you can find some pretty intriguing facts, I think. And so I decided to go back, look, and just figure out what I could find in the numbers. So we'll start off with the number one seed of each conference, and I decided to go back since 2011 and just track every single number one seed. How well did they do, and did they rest their starters or not? And you can find some pretty interesting stuff. For one thing, pretty much every team played their starters. Sometimes teams just had to because they didn't have their seeding locked up. Sometimes they didn't have to, but chose to anyways, but I'm including both. So if a number one seed in a conference decides to play their starters and not rest anybody, they only go one and done the next round 9.1% of the time. They make it to the AFC or NFC championship game 18.2% of the time. They go to the Super Bowl and lose 45.5% of the time, and they win the Super Bowl 27.3% of the time. That's just in the past 9 years. This means that if you're a one seed who played their starters week 17, you have a 73% chance to make the Super Bowl. That's just incredibly high odds, and it's a really good situation. Now, of course, those odds are very high partially because you're a number one seed, and number one seeds tend to do very well because you're probably the best team in your conference or maybe the best team in football, so you have a good chance regardless. But now let's look at what happens if you don't play your starters. If you have your starters rest, what are the odds that you go to the Super Bowl? So let's move on to the teams that decided to rest their starters week 17 despite the fact that they had a bye already locked up. And again, I'm dealing with a small sample size. There was only 4 teams that had that happen. The reason why I didn't want to go back further is A, it's just more difficult to figure that data out, and B, the further back you go, just rules were different back then. You can't practice the same way you can practice now. So I think that was a good cutoff point. But yeah, in the past 9 years, the 4 teams that decided to rest their starters week 17, guess how many total wins those 4 teams have? The maximum number would be 12 if they all won the Super Bowl. None of them won the Super Bowl. In fact, only one won a game. The other 3 went one and done. And then there was the Saints, the only team that won a game. They only won that game due to the, if you remember, the Nelson Agholor dropped pass that resulted in an interception. So that game could have easily gone the other way as well. Who knows what happens if that pass is caught? The other 3 were the Baltimore Ravens, who, that was last year. We all remember that. The Dallas Cowboys, when they got stunned by Aaron Rodgers. That was in the Dak Prescott rookie season. Then you had the 15-1 Green Bay Packers. Those were the 3 teams that all went one and done. And the only other team to go one and done in this era was the Denver Broncos in the Miracle at Mile High. It literally took a miracle play for a team that didn't rest their starters to go one and done. It happened 3 times out of the 4 teams that decided to rest their starters. To me, this is clear evidence, despite the small sample size, that if you have a bye week, play your starters. There is a chance that someone could get hurt. There's a much bigger chance that you'll get rust on your body, and it's a real thing. I mean, teams that don't play as much in the preseason also have a lower winning percentage week 1. You need to keep playing football to be good at football. You just do. So this is probably bad news for the Kansas City Chiefs, who plan on resting their starters week 17, which is in 2 days as of recording this video. It might be tomorrow, depending on when I release it. The Kansas City Chiefs plan on resting their starters, which might not be a very good thing. Just, all things considered, teams that rest their starters week 17 and then don't play into wildcard week now have 2 weeks where they haven't played, and that's just not very good. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, that's great for the 1 seed, but there's going to be plenty of teams that have to play on wildcard weekend anyway. So should they take a week off so they can get some rest? And that one, there's a lot more logic to. Logically, it makes sense. And statistically, it's a lot closer than the other one. I decided to look at just 3 and 4 seeds. I'm just looking at the 3 and 4 seeds. I wanted to try to keep things similar as possible. So just teams that had, I wanted to get a bigger sample size while keeping things similar. So these are just the teams that had a home playoff game. That's all it is in week 1 of the wild card round. If you look at the teams that didn't rest their starters, 48% of them went one and done. So, a little bit high, surprisingly, but nothing crazy. 40% of them ended up losing in the divisional round. So win one game, lose the next, which makes sense. Logically, that just makes sense that you would win a game and then lose the next just because, you're beating a team you're beating an away team, but then losing to a team that had a bye week. Logically, you get it. And then teams that went further than the divisional round, there was 12% of those. So very low number here. But again, that's difficult. I mean, you have to win one playoff game. So that's already like, a 52% chance you're going to do that. And then you have to pull off a pretty big upset just to get to the AFC or NFC championship game. So that's difficult. Then if you look at teams that rested their starters, it's again pretty similar. It's not that different whatsoever. There's a slight difference. Teams that rested their starters do have a better chance of going one and done, almost about a 9% chance higher of going one and done. So that's not great. Although the interesting thing is they have a slightly better chance of getting past the divisional round. Again, we're dealing with small sample sizes here. There was about 32 total teams that had a 3 and 4 seed, in the playoffs to begin with. So that's what we're working with. So again, not resting your starters, you have a better chance of winning that first game. Although you kind of have a better chance of making a deep run if you get that bye, which does make some sense, I think. You're better off in that first week, but as a whole, you're going to be more rested in the future. And so I actually think this is a very case-by-case scenario if you're not going to get a bye, whether or not you should rest your starters. I think a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who clearly could use some rest, I think it makes sense to rest them. But maybe a team like Tampa Bay, who has sort of struggled to get the chemistry down this season, they should probably play their starters. That makes sense to me. It should be mentioned, there is a third option besides rest and not rest. There is a middle ground there, and that's you could have your starters play some and then have your backups play the rest of the game. Now, if you look at teams that didn't have a bye week, it's, again, pretty similar, nothing too crazy. But if you look at teams that did have the bye week, the teams that had the 1 seed, it's interesting. 3 of those teams that had a number 1 seed decided to rest their starters partially. So I didn't include that in my initial data because that's a completely different thing. It was the Denver Broncos the year that they lost the Super Bowl, the New England Patriots when they came back from down 28-3 to win a Super Bowl, and the Philadelphia Eagles when they beat the Patriots the very next year. So out of the 3 teams that did that, 2 won a Super Bowl. The other one went to the Super Bowl, although they did get blown out. I do think that that's, to me, the far superior option. Let your players play half a game and then have them rest the second half. I think that makes the most sense. And again, we're dealing with small sample sizes, but the small sample size does back it up. And a small sample size isn't always a terrible thing. A small sample size usually means that, okay, it's probably not going to be perfect, and there definitely are ways it could go wrong. But a small sample size is still better than just randomly guessing. So I think that the numbers back up what I think. I think that if you have a bye week, honestly, probably the better move is to play your starters for a half and then have them sit out the second half. The next best option is to have them play. You don't want to not have them play for 2 straight weeks. If you know you'll be playing Wild Card Weekend, then it might make sense to rest your starters, or it might make sense to play them. It really depends on what your team looks like and what's the makeup of your team. Either way, you've got a much better chance of winning a Super Bowl, obviously, if you have the 1 seed. Only 2 teams that even didn't have a 1 seed in this time frame won a Super Bowl. That was the Ravens and the Giants. One of them rested their starters, one of them didn't. So no real information there. But yeah, I mean, that's the data that I came up with. Hopefully you guys can look at that and maybe make your own decision. You know my opinion. I'd like to hear yours. Let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.